Carolyn, are you the defender of the free market? And Charlie is saying we need to spend money because on war because it stimulates the economy. War doesn't stimulate; it destroys.
Judge, I'm certainly not defending an unfettered free market economy. We've never had one of those.
Wait, was that a real question?
Well, it was a real question. Does war stimulate the economy?
Not these wars. These wars are stimulating, as I said, a small group of military contractors who in our lifetime would have ever believed what's going on now with this. No, this war is draining the economy. It's perfect empire decline. Drain the economy as the foreign...
The war on terror is draining the economy.
Charlie, I didn't interrupt you. The war on... What we're doing now is we're in foreign entanglements at a time when you have to rebuild the country. Put that money to use in this country,
Charlie, we got about 20 seconds before the break, and then we'll be back. Would the war be as popular if it weren't paid for on a credit card, if it had been pay as you go?
All wars are paid for on a credit card because when you fight a war, when you win the war on terror, you take out a mortgage because it benefits future generations.
All right. Heldman, Gasparino, Salenti, stay with us. We spoke earlier about that new $26 billion bailout to the states. Congress claims it's paid for. Our freedom fighters
But we can't stand by and do nothing while pink slips are given to the men and women who educate our children or keep our communities safe.
Today's $26 billion jobs bill was sold to America as being fully paid for. What they failed to say is it's paid for by promising to cut spending on things like food stamps years from now. Does anyone really think that's going to happen, or does this bill just dig our deficit hole even deeper? To our freedom fighters, Carol, in 4 years from now, they're going to say food stamps have to go to pay for the money that we spent in 2010. Do you believe that?
Well, unfortunately, I'm cynical. I know how government works, and that's not the case. In 4 years, we won't remember that we've spent this money, unfortunately, and that goes for both Republicans and Democrats. And it's a function of our rapid electoral political system where it takes tons of money to run. We're always campaigning, and we're always making promises that we can't keep. And unfortunately, I think this is one.
The president, we just heard him, said he was concerned about jobs for teachers. Well, that's not in the Constitution. And about public safety. I guess he means jobs for cops. That's not in the Constitution. Let me ask you. Should we borrow $26 billion and give it to these public sector unions?
Just like I'm not that, I'm not, you know, I don't think we should be cutting $20 billion out of the defense budget. I wouldn't necessarily care about this except for one thing.
What?
They spent $800 billion on a stimulus package that was supposed to, that went into saving teachers' jobs. Most of that money that they sold, those bonds, that $800 billion in bonds that they sold back in, I guess, the early 2009, that was basically a transfer of that money to the states so they could keep teachers employed. And that, we're double dipping, and that's wasteful.
The federal government borrows money or prints money, gives it to the states, and tells them how to spend it. Who knows better how to spend money, the locals or the feds? Jerry, question 2. Do these stimuluses ever work?
Let's go for the question 2. The stimuluses haven't worked. The proof is in the unemployment. And all of a sudden now we're hearing from the Federal Reserve that, hey, things aren't as good as we predicted. And we said this was going to happen. The Great Depression is on the way. And secondly, this is nothing more than a campaign stunt. Look who Obama's support is. It's the teachers, it's the unions. And are they going to cut back on food stamps in 2014? I've come up with a new name for food stamps. Recovery rations.
Recovery rations. Carolyn, is this a campaign stunt that the Democrats are using because they're doing so poorly in the polls and they're in danger of losing the House of Representatives and the huge majority they have in the Senate this fall?
Of course, Judge, but, you know, I think I might be the only one on the panel who's actually in favor of it. I know that we're not going to be paying for it the way we say we will, but I am very much in favor of this stopgap measure to save 300,000 jobs.
But, Carolyn, isn't it really duplicitous to say that this is, we need to help teachers now when that's all we've been doing. The $800 billion that we spent 2 years ago on stimulus, which didn't work, it was supposed to go to shovel-ready projects, was literally a transfer to the states. They did not use it to build projects. They used it to keep the unions employed, the teachers, the paper pushers in Albany and Sacramento. So why do they get 2 bites at the apple?
Go ahead, Carolyn. You want to answer that?
Sure. Well, Charlie, I think that this is very clearly directed with strings attached to jobs. And so in that sense, I think this will be done right. And
Joe was the other.
Jerry, the government...
The other was too. It was a transfer to the states so they could keep the bureaucrats employed.
The government can't borrow and spend and stimulate. It can't get us out of a problem caused by too much borrowing and spending with more borrowing and spending.
It's like you having a second mortgage and taking out a third. That's going to help. And let's look at this, they're giving the money to the teachers. Oh, they're doing a great job. You want to talk about a bureaucracy. What is the United States now? We used to be #1 in the amount of kids graduating college. Now we're down to number 12. It's a losing ball game, and they're dumping more money into it.
Where's the $26 billion coming from, Charlie?
I mean, you know, we'll either print it or borrow it.
Well, printed will be your buddies, the Fed.
Right.
Borrowing,
that's right.
That's
right. The agency that you want to get rid of tomorrow.
The agency that I want to get rid of tomorrow.
Right. Okay.
Overnight.
Right.
But seriously, doesn't anybody understand in the government basic economics 101? Well, this is a fraud intended to please Democratic constituencies until after Election Day.
Right. Yes, it's so obvious, and you know what I'm sort of annoyed and angered about is that teachers' unions have been getting breaks all along. They are the ones that benefited from the $800 billion stimulus package.
This is another big one. Carolyn Heldman, Charlie Gasparino, Jerry Salenti, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. After this, Libertarian Larry Elder, Unlimited Government. And are you ready for this? Getting rid of the IRS. Coming up next. A fellow libertarian whose voice is heard all across the nation joins me now. Larry Elder joins me from the Fox Los Angeles Bureau. You know him. Look at that handsome face. You know him from television, from talk radio, and he soon is going to host a webcast called We've Got a Country to Save.com. Larry, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Judge. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. You've likened yourself to economist Milton Friedman, who once said, quote, I am a Republican with a capital R and a Libertarian with a small L. Is that you, Larry?
Right. That is exactly me, yes.
Why is that
Milton
you?
Friedman, well, I'm not a member of the Libertarian Party, capital L, primarily because of their stance, Judge, on national security. I support the war in Afghanistan. I support the war in Iraq. Most libertarians don't. I understand there's a principled argument to be made for their opposition, but I don't support that. I think there's a certain kind of naivete on the part of libertarians. We got bad guys out there who hate us, and I live in the real world, and we need to deal with them.
Should we have declared war on Afghanistan or war on Iraq, or can the Congress let the president go and kill whoever he wants wherever he finds them? There's nothing libertarian about that, Larry.
There's nothing that most libertarians feel, and again, I understand that that's an unorthodox position for libertarians, but the president went to Congress, he got resolution from the House and from the Senate, he got a United Nations resolution unanimously to tell Saddam Hussein to declare his weapons, and if not, there would be consequences. So it's not like he just did it on his own. He got authority from Congress in order to go after them.
Do you
remember the bad old days?
Do you like the way the war in Afghanistan is being fought? Do you think it's being fought towards victory, or do you think the president is too timid and in his heart of hearts doesn't even want to be there, Larry?
I think your latter statement is accurate. I don't think Obama really wants to be there. I think basically he said it was the good war in order to go after George W. Bush and criticize him for Iraq. But I don't believe his heart was ever in it. And I don't believe you fight a war by telling your enemy you're going to be out by a date certain, which is what Obama's been doing.
The president's chief national security advisor, General Jones, a retired four-star general and commandant of the Marine Corps, on the eve of the build-up in Afghanistan said there are fewer than 100 Taliban there. Question, why do we need 130,000 troops to find 100 people? Wouldn't it be cheaper, easier, and better if we treated them like pirates and unleashed mercenaries to find them?
That's an alternative, but look, they launched attacks against us for 9/11. We helped to expel the Soviet Union.
We already killed and got rid of the people that, or captured the people that hurt us and killed us in 9/11.
What I was going to say is that after we helped expel the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan, we left. The Taliban came in, Al-Qaeda came in and launched attacks. There's every reason to believe if we leave prematurely, the same thing will happen again. We shouldn't leave until there's some semblance, Judge, of some kind of functioning government so that the same thing doesn't happen again. Otherwise, the whole effort has been for naught.
All right, but you don't think we can establish Jeffersonian democracy there, do you?
I don't think we have it here.
All right, that's something we agree on. And speaking of things that we agree on, my dear Larry, is it a pipe dream for those of us who want to get rid of the IRS and the income tax, or might that happen in your lifetime and mine?
I think it'll happen perhaps in our lifetime, but not anytime soon. Change happens very slowly in Congress. Even if we had a libertarian president like Thomas Sowell or Walter Williams, you still have to deal with a Democratic Congress, Republicans that all too often sell out to the other side. People are scared by getting rid of the IRS. People are scared by the idea of lower taxes. People are scared by the idea of rolling back entitlements programs. Many people are dependent upon them. So this big ship of state moves very slowly, and it turns very slowly.
Our mutual friend Thomas Sowell will be on with us tomorrow night on Freedom Watch to talk about these very issues. I have often argued, and I think you accept this argument, and I use this phrase when introducing you, we need to starve the beast. We need to shrink the government down to the confines of the Constitution. And the most effective way to do that is to take their mother's milk away from them, which is the income tax. If we did that, what would we replace it with?
Well, we could replace it with lower government. Remember, the Founding Fathers didn't have an income tax. They didn't have a value-added tax. We had very limited enumerated powers that the government did that were financed by duties and tariffs. That's what the Founding Fathers intended. If they intended for there to be a Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, they would have figured out some sort of way of funding it. They did not intend for government to be anywhere near this big. And at 1900, look at all levels of government, federal, state, and local, government took about 10% of the nation's money. Now it takes about 50%. The Founding Fathers didn't need an income tax, didn't want one, because government was not supposed to be doing the stuff it's doing.
Even though it would be catastrophic if we were to end these programs overnight, and no one, not even I, is calling for it. Aren't Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid unconstitutional? Nowhere contemplated by the Constitution?
They are. So is FEMA, so is OSHA, so is minimum wages. We can go down the list. Congress has walked all over the Commerce Clause, walked all over Article 1, Section 8. Both sides have done it. The Founding Fathers, were they to come back right now, would be appalled. They would go back from where they came from if they saw the corruption and pollution of this wonderful document called the Constitution.
I knew I could get you around to the Freedom Watch way of thinking. Larry Elder, it's a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much for joining us. The plain truth about war, and it's an ugly truth. Next. Today we have talked about war. When is war just? When is it fair? How can the government wage war without declaring it? Think about it. Waging war is the most awesome, powerful, and irreversible state of affairs that the government enters into. So fearful were the founders of the power to wage war that they assured that the president could only fight a war if Congress first declared one. Kings and princes in Europe and tyrants all over the world have started wars against their real and imagined enemies. But in America, only Congress could declare a war. Iraq and Afghanistan are our longest conflicts in history. Has Congress declared war on Iraq? No. Has Congress declared war on Afghanistan? No. Has Congress declared war on any person, group, or government from and after 9/11? No. Congress instead gave President Bush and his successors, all of his successors, an open-ended invitation to fight against and to kill whomever they wanted in the name of the war on terror. But the Constitution trusts this kind of power with no individual, and neither should you. The philosopher Randolph Bourne once said that war is the health of the state. He was right. During war, people give up their liberties and their property to the government because they trust that the government will use their liberty and their property to win the war. During the Civil War, Lincoln locked up thousands of journalists and political leaders who spoke out against him in the North. During World War I, Woodrow Wilson locked up hundreds of American citizens who were critical of America's war involvement, and he used a law, the Espionage Act of 1917, that's still on the books. In World War II, FDR locked up over 100,000 Japanese Americans without charge, without trial, without a judge, without a jury, and the Supreme Court let him do it. Those people who are arrested were arrested on the basis of their nationality, their ancestry, and their race. And every president since Lincoln who has exercised unconstitutional powers to suppress the speech they hate or feared, including President Obama, has used war and these historical examples as an excuse. Do we have a Constitution or don't we? We do. Is it the supreme law of the land or isn't it? It is. Can something be done just because can a war be fought just because the president wants to call it a war? Of course not. Only fidelity to the Constitution will save us from tyrants, and only we can make politicians follow the Constitution. Thanks for watching us. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow night on Freedom Week from New York, defending freedom. So long, America.